Merry Christmas to everyone celebrating, however you mark the day, whether it's, deeply religious for you or more about the secular cheer or maybe just enjoying a time when things feel a bit calmer. December 25th, it's just undeniably this huge global thing.
It really is. And that global reach, the history behind it, that's exactly what we're digging into today. We want to unpack Christmas, look at its origins from a neutral historical viewpoint.
Yeah, our mission here isn't just to chat about Christmas traditions, but to really analyze it like historians do. It's like a complex cultural artifact. And if you peel back the layers, the date itself is fascinating. Scholars call it a palimpsest.
Oh, that's a great word for it. Like those old manuscripts where you can still see the faint traces of earlier writing underneath the main text. That's Christmas.
Exactly.
And our sources for this deep dive let us see those layers pretty clearly. We're looking at ancient astronomy, those really powerful Roman and Germanic pagan traditions around midwinter, the complex internal logic of early Christian thinkers, and then, of course, you can't ignore modern commercialism. It's all in there.
And that brings us to the central historical puzzle. It's the reason we're really doing this. December 25th. It's just not in the Bible at all. So how, with the New Testament completely silent on this, did this specific date become the absolute bedrock of a global holiday?
It's a fantastic question to start with because, focusing on the date of birth was actually quite a late development in Christian history. For the very first followers, Jesus' birth just wasn't the main event they focused on.
Okay, so let's unpack that early silence first. If you look at the Gospels that do have the nativity stories, Matthew and Luke, they give us these incredibly rich accounts, but they're focused on theology, right?
Yeah.
Like establishing lineage, fulfilling prophecy.
Precisely. They're theological narratives, not modern historical records trying to pin down exact dates. You find absolutely zero clues about a specific day or even the season of Jesus' birth in those texts.
They weren't writing biographies in our sense.
Yeah. No, not at all. And what's more, if you look at the earliest Christian texts, we have Paul's letters, maybe the Gospel of Mark. They don't even include the birth story. Their focus is razor sharp. It's all on the Paschal mystery.
The suffering, death, and resurrection.
Yes. That was the absolute center of their faith and their commemoration.
That makes a lot of theological sense. I mean, the core event, the thing that changes everything from their perspective, is the Passion and Resurrection. They mark that weekly, on Sunday, the Lord's Day, and then annually with Easter. Compared to that, a physical birth. Maybe it felt less urgent in those first couple of centuries.
It certainly seems that way. And you also have to remember celebrating birthdays in general. That was viewed with a lot of suspicion back then, maybe even hostility.
Why was that?
Well, it was strongly associated with pagan customs, big celebrations for the birthdays of gods, Roman emperors, famous heroes. Early Christians were really keen to set themselves apart from all that.
So instead of celebrating physical birth, they kind of flipped it.
Exactly. They focused on commemorating the deaths of martyrs. They called the day someone died their true birthday, their birth into eternal life, the physical birthday, seen as secondary, sort of earthly, and just not something they felt a need to mark liturgically.
Okay, so if they were actively avoiding birth celebrations, what changed? What prompted this huge theological shift where suddenly they needed a date for Jesus' birth?
That's where you see this really profound theological development happening in the 3rd and 4th centuries. The shift from indifference to actively seeking a date runs parallel to the church hammering out its understanding of the incarnation.
The doctrine that God became fully human in Jesus Christ.
Yes, and this wasn't just an abstract idea, it was crucial for defining the faith.
How did emphasizing the incarnation create the need for a date?
Well, the church was dealing with various challenges to this idea. You had groups, like the Docetists, arguing that Christ only seemed human, that his physical body was kind of an illusion. To push back against that, to strongly affirm that Christ was fully human, born, lived, suffered, commemorating the birth event itself became liturgically necessary. It grounded the whole story in human history.
I see. It's like proof of the premise. It wasn't just about the end result, the resurrection, but about affirming the reality of God entering human existence in the first place.
Precisely. The incarnation anchors God in time and history. Once that theological need became strong enough, the search for a specific meaningful date really took off.
But even when they decided they needed a date, it wasn't like everyone suddenly agreed, okay, December 25th it is.
Right.
There was still a lot of uncertainty across the Roman Empire.
Oh, absolutely not. Total chaos, really. Different Christian communities were floating all sorts of dates based on local traditions or different ways of calculating things. We get a glimpse of this from Clement of Alexandria, writing around AD 200. He mentions dates being proposed in Egypt, like May 20th, April 20th, April 21st. And significantly, December 25th isn't even on his list.
And then there was the main rival date, especially popular in the eastern part of the empire.
January 6th. Yeah, that was a big one. In places like Egypt and Asia Minor, January 6th was widely celebrated as the Feast of the Epiphany or Theophany. And originally, that one feast often commemorated both Jesus' baptism and his birth. It was about the manifestation, the revealing of God to the world.
So you had the West, centered on Rome, leaning towards December 25th for the Nativity, while the East was often focused on January 6th for this broader manifestation. Two tracks running side by side for a while.
They were, yes. But gradually, Rome's choice, December 25th, gained more traction across the empire. Over time, most of the Eastern churches did adopt December 25th just for the Nativity, which left January 6th to focus more specifically on the visit of the Magi, the wise men. Though fascinatingly, the Armenian church still holds on to that older tradition and celebrates Christmas on January 6th today.
Okay, so that brings us to the moment where December 25th really gets locked in, at least in the West. We have actual historical documentation from Rome in the mid-4th century.
That's right. The first really solid piece of evidence comes from something called the chronograph of 354. It's sometimes called the calendar of Philocalus, after the scholar thought to have compiled it. This was basically a fancy almanac for the Roman elite, had everything in it: consul dates, lists of popes, bishop lists.
Like the official Roman day planner of its time.
Pretty much. And the crucial part for us is a section called the Depositio Martyrum, the list of days commemorating martyrs. And right there, for December 25th, it includes the entry, eighth call Ian Natus Christus, in Bethlehem Iudae.
On the 8th day before the calends of January, which is Roman calendar speak for December 25th, Christ was born in Bethlehem of Judea. So by AD 336, which is the date usually associated with that list, the celebration was established in the church in Rome. The silence is officially broken.
And this is the real pivot point for our deep dive. We know when the date was fixed in Rome, more or less. But the million-dollar question remains, why? Why December 25th specifically, out of all the possibilities floating around? This is where the big scholarly debate really heats up, and we get two main hypotheses.
Right, and these theories often get pitted against each other, like it has to be one or the other, but maybe they're not totally mutually exclusive.
That's increasingly how scholars see it. One theory explains the internal theological reasoning, and the other explains the external cultural factors that made it spread so successfully.
Okay, let's tackle the first one, the one that relies on internal Christian logic, the calculation hypothesis. This argues the date was figured out completely independently of any pagan festivals, using existing Christian ways of thinking about time and prophecy.
That's the core idea. It hinges on this ancient concept called integral age, or computus in Latin. This was a strong belief, especially among early Christian chronographers, that really important figures, especially prophets, and certainly Christ, lived the perfect, complete number of years.
Meaning they died on the same calendar day they were conceived, or maybe born? That sounds specific?
It does to us, but it reflected a deep sense of cosmic order and perfection to them. So the logic goes like this. Step 1. Figure out the date of the crucifixion. Chronographers in the 3rd century, like the very influential Sextus Julius Africanus, worked hard on this. Based on their reading of the Gospels and the Jewish calendar, they calculated the date of the Passion as the 14th day of Nisan, which they then equated to March 25th in their Roman Julian calendar.
And March 25th wasn't just any date, was it? It had other significance.
Huge significance. March 25th was widely believed in antiquity to be the date of the vernal equinox, the start of spring. It was also sometimes considered the anniversary of creation itself. So linking Christ's death, the act of recreation, to this date felt incredibly symbolic and fitting.
Okay, so death on March 25th. Step 2. Apply the integral age idea. If he died on March 25th.
He must have been conceived on March 25th. This established March 25th as the Feast of the Annunciation, the moment the angel Gabriel told Mary about the Incarnation, the start of it all.
Right. Conception on March 25th. Now for the final step. The math seems pretty straightforward.
Exactly. You take a normal 9-month human gestation period from March 25th.
You land squarely on December 25th as the date of birth.
Bingo. So this whole line of reasoning provides a completely internal Christian rationale for the date. It doesn't need any pagan influence. Proponents argue this theological calculation was done first, and the date was chosen for these reasons, before any major consideration of pagan festivals.
Okay, that's a coherent internal explanation. But then we have the other major theory, the one that's probably more famous, which points fingers directly at pagan Rome, the history of religions or substitution hypothesis.
Right, this is the one most people have probably encountered. It suggests a much more pragmatic, strategic move by the church. The basic idea is that the church saw how incredibly popular the midwinter festivals were. People were just used to celebrating, feasting, lighting lights around this time. Trying to stamp it out wasn't working.
So the classic, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em strategy, or rather, baptize 'em.
Pretty much. The argument is they deliberately chose December 25th to provide a Christian alternative to a specific, hugely important Roman festival celebrated on that exact day. Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun.
Sol Invictus. This is a big deal for the Roman Empire, wasn't it? More than just another god's birthday.
Oh, it was massive, especially by the late 3rd century. Emperor Aurelian officially established the festival in AD 274. It was part of a push for imperial unity, trying to rally the empire around this powerful, syncretic sun god.
So the church, according to this theory, saw an opportunity. Place Christ's birth on the same day as the sun god's birth.
And you offer a direct symbolic replacement. You take the potent symbolism of the sun's rebirth at the darkest time of year, and you rebrand it. Christ becomes the true Son of Righteousness, a phrase they could pull right from the prophet Malachi in the Old Testament. It was clever theological marketing.
It allowed new converts, or potential converts, to keep their festive date but give it a new Christian meaning. Makes sense from a missionary perspective.
Definitely. It smoothed the transition for a lot of people in a rapidly growing religion.
But what's the main criticism of this substitution theory? If it was such a deliberate strategy, wouldn't the early church fathers have, written about it, mentioned it?
That's the biggest weakness, historically speaking. We simply don't have any Christian writers from that crucial 3rd or 4th century period explicitly saying, hey, we picked December 25th to compete with Sol Invictus. The first person we know of who directly connects Christmas and the pagan sun festival is actually a Syriac bishop writing way later in the 12th century. That's a long gap.
And there's also that timing question, right? Aurelian formally sets up Sol Invictus in 274 AD. If the calculation hypothesis suggests Christians might have already been leaning towards December 25th before 274,
Then it makes straight substitution a bit less likely as the primary reason for the date choice. It suggests the Christian date might have come first, and the overlap was maybe a convenient coincidence that they later capitalized on.
so perhaps the best way to look at it isn't either, but both hand.
That's where most scholarship lands now, I think. The most convincing picture is a synthesis. The calculation likely provided the internal cause, the theological justification, the reason the church leadership in Rome felt comfortable with December 25th.
It gave them their why.
Exactly. But the date's powerful overlap with existing beloved midwinter festivals, not just Sol Invictus, but the whole festive season, including Saturnalia, provided the crucial external cultural catalyst. It explains why the date was accepted so readily and spread so quickly once Rome promoted it.
The timing was just too perfect culturally to ignore.
Absolutely. The date was chosen, perhaps for internal reasons, but its wild success was practically guaranteed because it landed right in the middle of a season everyone already associated with light, feasting, and hope. And the church leaders absolutely knew how to leverage that symbolism once the date was set. Look at St. Augustine, writing in the late 4th century. He explicitly uses the sun imagery. He, therefore, who bent low and lifted us up, chose the shortest day, yet the one whence light begins to increase.
He's directly linking Christ's birth to the turning of the sun at the solstice. So they drive the date internally, perhaps, but then absolutely use the external cultural meaning to preach it, to make it resonate, to make it stick.
It shows a really savvy understanding of cultural engagement, especially as Christianity gained more power and influence. They weren't afraid to use the symbols already present in the culture.
It was introduced into what you called a crowded marketplace of midwinter celebrations, and its success was fueled by tapping into something incredibly ancient and universal.
Which is, of course, the winter solstice itself. Long before Rome, long before Christianity, this astronomical event shaped human life and ritual.
Right. Astronomically, it's that point, usually December 20th to 23rd in the northern hemisphere, where the sun reaches its lowest point, giving us the shortest day and longest night. The word solstitium even means sun standing still.
And for ancient peoples, especially farming societies, this wasn't just an interesting fact, it was deeply profound. There was a real primal anxiety, will the light keep fading? Will the sun disappear forever? Followed by immense relief and celebration when the days started getting longer again. The rebirth of the sun wasn't just symbolic, it was the literal promise of returning warmth, life, and eventually food.
We can even see physical evidence of how important this was, going back thousands of years.
Oh, yeah. Massive ancient structures like Stonehenge in England, Newgrange in Ireland, built maybe 5,000 years ago, are precisely aligned to capture the sunrise or sunset on the winter solstice. This awareness, this marking of the sun's turning point, it's baked into human consciousness way before organized religion formalized it.
So when the early church is settling on December 25th in the 4th century, this midwinter period is already jam-packed with meaning and tradition. It wasn't just Sol Invictus. There were at least 3 major pre-Christian festivals shaping the season. Understanding these helps us see the cultural ingredients that eventually got mixed into Christmas.
Definitely. First, and arguably the most popular and rowdy, was the Roman festival of Saturnalia.
This one lasted for days, right? Like a whole week of partying.
Yeah, typically December 17th to the 23rd. It honored Saturn, the god of agriculture, sowing, and abundance. It was just a time of widespread merrymaking. Think public banquets, schools closed, no business conducted, courts shut down, everything paused for the party.
And the really distinctive thing about Saturnalia was the social chaos, the role reversal.
That's the most famous part. For a few days, the strict Roman social hierarchy got turned upside down. Slaves were temporarily freed from their duties. They could gamble, wear their master's clothes. Sometimes masters would even serve meals to their slaves.
Wow. What was the thinking behind that?
It symbolized a temporary return to a mythical golden age that they believed Saturn had ruled over, a time of perfect equality and ease. It was a controlled explosion of social norms before everything went back to normal. And crucially, for later Christmas traditions, gift-giving was a big part of Saturnalia. Usually small, inexpensive things, wax candles called cere, little pottery or wax figures called sigillaria. And the seasonal greeting was, "Io, Saturnalia," like, "Hey, Saturnalia."
Okay, so that's the big public blowout. Then, landing right on the 25th itself, you have the more formal imperial festival we mentioned, Dies Natalis Solis Invicti.
The birthday of the unconquered sun. Officially established in 274 AD, this one had a stronger political dimension. It was about celebrating the rebirth of the sun, yes, but also linking that power to the emperor and promoting unity across the diverse empire. More state ceremony, solemn worship, celebrating light conquering darkness.
And then if we look north, beyond the Roman frontiers, among the Germanic and Norse peoples, you have their own powerful midwinter traditions centered around Yule, or Joel.
Yule wasn't just a single day, either, more like a whole season around the solstice. And for Northern Europe, midwinter feasting was partly just practical. This was the time you'd slaughter the livestock you couldn't feed through the long, harsh winter. So suddenly, you had an abundance of fresh meat. It was the natural time for big feasts.
Makes sense. And the iconic image from Yule is the log, right?
The Yule log, absolutely. A huge log would be brought into the main hall, decorated, lit from the remains of last year's log if possible, and it was meant to burn continuously throughout the festival, sometimes for 12 days. It was a powerful symbol of bringing warmth and light indoors to combat the outside darkness and cold. Yule also involved drinking lots of ale, honoring gods like Odin, who had a Yule-related name, Jolnir, and making sacrifices called Blut. Feasting, drinking, light, totally ingrained.
Okay, so you have this incredibly rich soup of existing traditions, Roman partying, imperial sun worship, Norse feasting, and fire logs. This is where that concept of syncretism becomes so important for understanding Christmas.
Yes, syncretism is the key process here. It's how these deeply rooted folk customs things people just did every winter get absorbed, layered over, and given new Christian meanings.
And often, those old customs prove more durable than the official theology trying to replace them, don't they?
Absolutely. History shows that deeply embedded cultural habits are incredibly resilient. The church, especially as it gained influence, often found it more effective to co-opt popular customs rather than try to completely eradicate them. They just reframed them within the Christian story.
The history of gift-giving is a perfect case study of this, isn't it? It starts with those Roman sigillaria during Saturnalia, small, maybe funny or sentimental tokens.
Right. Then Christianity provides 2 powerful new layers on top of that existing habit. First, you have the scriptural layer, the story of the Magi, the wise men, bringing valuable gifts, gold, frankincense, myrrh to the infant Jesus. That shifts the act of giving from just general holiday cheer towards something more sacred, an act of tribute.
And the second layer gives us the figurehead, the legend of St. Nicholas.
Exactly. St. Nicholas of Myra, a real bishop from the 4th century in what's now Turkey, becomes legendary for his secret acts of charity. The most famous story, of course, is him providing gold for the dowries of 3 poor sisters to save them from destitution. So now you have a Christian saint embodying selfless giving as the model. He becomes the perfect substitute for the pagan abundance figures.
And that figure, St. Nicholas, morphs over centuries into the Dutch Santa Claus who brings gifts, and eventually crosses the Atlantic to become the modern secular Santa Claus. The Roman habit, the biblical story, the Christian saint, they all merge.
It's a perfect syncretic blend, and you see the same thing with the Christmas tree. It feels so central now, but its roots go way back into pre-Christian reverence for nature.
Right. Evergreens, holly, ivy, fir boughs were powerful symbols for ancient Europeans. In the dead of winter, they represented persistence, life continuing even in the cold and dark. Bringing them indoors was almost like sympathetic magic, wasn't it? Warding off evil, reminding people life would return.
It absolutely was. But the specific tradition of the decorated indoor tree that we can trace more directly to 16th century Germany, and it seems to have evolved out of something called the paradise tree, used in medieval religious plays.
Paradise tree, tell me more about that.
Well, December 24th, Christmas Eve, was traditionally the feast day of Adam and Eve in some medieval calendars. To stage the Garden of Eden story in church plays or pageants, they needed a prop for the tree of knowledge. They often used a fir tree, a tannenbaum, and decorated it with apples to represent the forbidden fruit. Sometimes maybe wafers for the Eucharist, too.
Ah, so the tree starts as a prop representing the fall.
And somehow that tradition seems to have moved from the church play into people's homes, where it gradually became decorated more generally as a festive symbol, eventually losing the direct Adam and Eve connection for most people and becoming associated with Christ's birth instead.
That's quite a journey for a symbol. And the lights, where do they come in?
Well, the symbolism of light is central, connecting back to the solstice and Yule. The popular story, though maybe legendary, credits Martin Luther, the Protestant reformer, with first putting lit candles on a tree. The story goes he was walking home one winter night, saw stars twinkling through the branches of fir trees, and was so inspired he put candles on his family's tree to recreate the image.
Whether it's historically precise or not, it captures that linking of the natural world's light with the Christian message. And this German tradition really took off globally later on.
Yes, largely thanks to the British royal family in the 19th century. Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, was German, and he brought the tradition of the decorated, lighted Christmas tree to Windsor Castle. Illustrated newspapers spread the image, and it became hugely fashionable in Britain and America.
And that emphasis on light connects directly back to the Yule log, too, the Norse symbol of light conquering darkness.
Exactly. The Yule log was meant to burn for days, radiating heat and light. The Christian adaptation just reframed that. Lights and candles came to represent Jesus as the lux mundi, the light of the world. Though for centuries, putting actual flaming candles on a dry pine tree was incredibly dangerous.
I can imagine. Which leads to another fascinating moment of modern syncretism where technology steps in.
Right. In 1882, Edward Johnson, who worked with Thomas Edison, had the bright idea, literally, of stringing electric light bulbs together. He put 80 hand-wired red, white, and blue bulbs on his tree. That was the birth of electric Christmas lights, solving the fire hazard problem and allowing the light symbolism to continue safely.
Even the smaller decorations, the greenery, like holly and ivy, they also got absorbed.
They did. Holly was used by the Romans during Saturnalia. Christians reinterpreted its sharp leaves as the crown of thorns and the red berries as drops of Christ's blood, a very direct symbolic mapping.
And mistletoe. That had strong pagan connections, didn't it?
Very strong. Sacred to the Druids, seen as having healing powers. It was also a symbol of peace. Enemies who met under mistletoe in the forest were supposedly obliged to lay down their weapons. The church wasn't too keen on its pagan fertility associations, so those were mostly suppressed, but the custom of kissing under it somehow survived as a sort of secular folk tradition.
Fascinating how some bits survive almost unchanged. Lastly, what about the sound of Christmas, caroling? Where does that come from?
Well, that has roots in a very different kind of noisy festive tradition.
Yeah.
The Anglo-Saxon custom of wassail.
Wassail, from wassail, meaning be in good health. What did wassailing involve?
It was pretty rowdy. Groups would go from house to house or sometimes farm to farm, especially to orchards, singing loudly, banging pots and pans, and drinking hot spiced ale, the wassail itself, often from a communal bowl. Part of it was holiday begging, expecting food or drink in return for the performance. But it was also seen as a folk ritual, driving away evil spirits from the houses and orchards to ensure good health and a good harvest next year. Mandatory boisterous hospitality.
So how does that turn into singing quiet hymns about baby Jesus?
That transformation happens mainly in the later Middle Ages. St. Francis of Assisi, in the 13th century, is often credited with popularizing hymns specifically about the Nativity story. He famously staged the first live nativity scene, the Presepio. These encouraged religious songs focused on the Christmas story itself, shifting the focus away from the boozy folk magic of wassailing towards more organized, pious devotion. The practice of going door-to-door singing remained, but the content and tone changed.
It's so clear how everything we associate with Christmas today is this incredible layering of history, pagan roots, Christian reinterpretation, folk customs. Which brings us to the modern era, where Christmas seems to live this strange double life.
It really does. On one hand, it's still the Christmas, a major feast in the Christian liturgical calendar. On the other hand, it's arguably the biggest secular cultural event on the planet, celebrated by billions who may have no religious connection to it at all.
You see that tension everywhere, don't you? The nativity scene right next to Santa Claus at the mall, playing Silent Night, followed immediately by Jingle Bells.
Exactly. And this sacred secular tension isn't actually new. It has deep historical roots. We shouldn't forget that there were times when Christmas was actively suppressed by Christians themselves because of its perceived pagan baggage.
You're talking about the Puritans, right? In 17th century England and America?
Yes. Puritan leaders famously banned Christmas celebrations. They saw the feasting, drinking, games, the mad mirth, as they called it, as fundamentally unbiblical, pagan, and disorderly. They recognized the ghost of Saturnalia still lingering in the holiday and wanted nothing to do with it. They tried to enforce a solemn, work-as-usual day.
But you can't keep a good holiday down, apparently. It went underground for a while and then came roaring back in the 19th century, but in a different form.
A profoundly different form. The 19th century saw this major reinvention of Christmas. It shifted from being a rowdy, public, often alcohol-fueled celebration to being primarily a domestic, family-centered, child-focused holiday. It became about warmth, nostalgia, sentimentality, almost an antidote to the perceived coldness and disruption of the Industrial Revolution.
And literature played a huge role in shaping that new image, didn't it? Especially one particular book.
Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, published in 1843, was absolutely pivotal. It's hard to overstate its influence. Dickens essentially crystallized this new vision of Christmas focused on family togetherness, charity, goodwill, reconciliation, and the emotional importance of childhood. He didn't invent these ideas, but he packaged them so perfectly that he arguably saved Christmas from its somewhat disreputable past and redefined it for the modern era.
And once the focus shifts so strongly onto the family, the home, and especially children, who are the main recipients of gifts, well, the door swings wide open for commerce, doesn't it?
Wide open. The need for toys, decorations, special foods, greeting cards, it all fuels the economic engine. We see advertisements specifically for Christmas gifts appearing in American newspapers as early as the 1820s. The link between the holiday and buying things becomes formalized very early on.
Then the 20th century just put that commercialization into overdrive and standardized the imagery. That image of Santa Claus' jolly, fat, red suit, white beard, the one everyone recognizes globally.
That specific image owes a huge debt to the Coca-Cola Company's advertising campaigns starting in the 1930s. They commissioned an artist, Haddon Sundblom, to create illustrations of Santa for their winter ads for decades. His depictions were warm, friendly, human, and incredibly consistent. They basically standardized the modern look of Santa for a global audience, cementing him as a primarily secular commercial icon.
And finally, the whole rhythm of the season got locked in by retail. The idea of a Christmas shopping season with a definite start date.
Yeah, department stores played a big role there. Think about the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, first held in 1924. It wasn't just entertainment. It explicitly marked the end of Thanksgiving and the official start of the Christmas shopping season. It institutionalized the consumer calendar.
So if we pull back and look at the whole story, this incredibly long and detailed journey we've just taken through the history, Christmas really is like a tapestry.
It is a tapestry woven from at least 4 distinct but deeply intertwined threads.
Okay, let's summarize them. Thread 1, the astronomical foundation. That universal human response to the winter solstice, the shortest day, the return of the sun, the core symbolism of light overcoming darkness.
Thread 2, the pagan legacy. All those vibrant pre-Christian customs from Rome and Northern Europe, Saturnalia's gift-giving and social license, Sol Invictus's sun worship, Yule's feasting, fires, and evergreens. They provided the raw materials, the cultural vocabulary.
Thread 3, the Christian reinterpretation. The internal theological process, perhaps the calculation hypothesis based on integral age that led the Church in Rome to December 25th. And then the skillful adoption of solar symbolism to explain the incarnation God entering the world as the true light.
And thread 4, the modern transformation. The 19th century pivot towards a domestic, child-centric holiday, heavily influenced by figures like Dickens. And then the massive wave of commercialization in the 20th century, creating the dual sacred-secular phenomenon we live with today.
It shows that the meaning of December 25th isn't fixed. It's been constantly layered, reinterpreted, reshaped for over 2,000 years to fit the needs and values of each era. It's an incredible testament to our deep human need to find light, hope, and connection, especially in the darkest time of the year.
Which leaves us with the final thought for you, the listener, to maybe ponder. If Christmas has constantly evolved, absorbing new layers just like it absorbed Saturnalia and Yule without completely erasing them, what might be next? What cultural symbols or practices from our time might get woven into the Christmas tradition in the next 100 years? What could December 25th possibly mean, say, 5 centuries from now?
That's a fascinating question to think about as you enjoy the holiday season, whatever it means to you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the rich, complex, and ever-evolving story of Christmas.